The carriage wheels hissed against the rain-slick stones of Grosvenor Street, scattering shallow pools like trembling glass beneath the thin glow of gaslight. London, wrapped in November's cold breath, watched with 1,000 unblinking eyes as Lady Eliza Harrow walked alone along the pavement's edge. Her gown, a modest grey silkmen, brushed the damp ground, darkening at the hem, yet she did not lift it. She would not pretend the street was unworthy of her, not now, not any more. Faces turned, some sympathetic, most cruelly amused, and the murmurs reached her like distant bells, her name folded into rumor, her past cradled on mocking tongues. Once, doors had flung wide for her approach. Now they merely watched, measuring the quiet ruin of a woman turned ordinary. Still, her spine remained straight, her chin lifted toward the rain, her dignity a lantern no storm dared extinguish. Within the windows of the milliner's shop, pearls and feathers gleamed beneath gilt frames, untouched by weather or shame. Ladies gathered there paused their laughter to glance out, their eyes glittering with curiosity cloaked as concern. "There goes Harrow," one whispered, not bothering to lower her voice. "Divorced, destitute, and still stubborn enough to walk among us." A faint titter followed, sharp as lace. Eliza felt it settle into her skin, yet she let her hand linger upon the small sprig of lavender she held, bruised but fragrant. It had been tucked beneath the gate of her modest home, unknown in origin, but she had carried it as if it were a secret promise. The scent stirred something old inside her, a fleeting echo of summers long swallowed by a loveless marriage. It was memory, and it was grief, and it was all she had left to defend her heart. Then came the pause in the air, that slow tightening that precedes a storm's first crack. A gentleman stepped from beneath the covered walkway across the street, his polished boots finding no mud, his coat unmarred by rain. Sir Edmund Blackwood, her former husband, stood waiting as if he had never moved on, as if time itself had bent to spare his vanity. His gaze swept over her with manufactured pity, then hardened into amusement. "No husband yet?" he inquired, each word dipped in honeyed malice. "London is awfully quiet when a woman has no master." The cruelty lay not in his voice alone, but in his leisure, in the manner he savored her answer before she had even thought to give one. Around them, the world held still, listeners invisible yet eager, their silence shaped like condemnation. Eliza met his gaze, and for an instant the old history flashed there. Candlelit dinners untouched, letters left unread, the locked chambers of a heart she had attempted to warm with devotion. He had taken her youth as if it were owed, then cast her away when obedience failed to please him. But she would not bleed in front of him now. Her refusal to speak settled between them like a drawn blade. Only the rain replied, tracing silver paths down her hair and lashes. Edmund smiled thinly, interpreting silence as surrender. He lifted a gloved hand, half in greeting, half in dismissal. "Walk carefully, Miss Harrow," he added with pointed emphasis. "The world shows little mercy to discarded things." Behind him, another laugh rippled from unseen spectators, and it stung more than any slap. Yet there was a stir beyond the gathered crowd, a growing hush like a breath being drawn by the entire street. The rain softened, as though mindful of newly arrived importance. The distant echo of hooves approached, steady, deliberate, undeniable. Heads turned slowly, curiosity overtaking cruelty, and whispers dissolved into startled quiet. From the veil of mist emerged a carriage unlike any other, long, dark, gleaming as polished obsidian, trimmed with fine lines of gold. Upon its door, illuminated by lamplight, rested a crest known even to the most foolish whisperer, the soaring raven of Raven's Hollow, the mark of the most powerful duke in England. The coachman reined in the horses with silent expertise, the carriage halting precisely beside Eliza's still form. Edmund's confidence faltered, a crack flashing briefly across his features before he smoothed it away. He stepped back instinctively, as if the vehicle itself possessed the power to wound him. The footman descended, immaculate even beneath the dripping sky, and opened the carriage door with measured grace. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Darkness waited within, deep and private. Then a hand, clad in immaculate black leather, extended slowly from the shadows, offering no coin, no blade, only invitation. Upon the gloved finger gleamed a heavy signet ring engraved with the same raven crest, catching the light like a captured star. It hovered there between worlds, between disgrace and destiny, between who she had been and what she was about to become. No name was spoken. No command issued. Yet the street held its breath, awaiting her choice, while in the unseen silence beyond the carriage door, a presence watched her, patient and unyielding, as if her answer had already been written in fate. Eliza did not remember stepping toward the carriage, only the sensation of air thickening around her, the world narrowing to the slow, deliberate rise of her hand. When her fingers brushed the leather glove, warmth bled through the barrier, an impossible heat in November's chill. The footman neither hurried nor hesitated, only steadied the door as she entered the velvet dark interior. Outside, whispers erupted, but they reached her like echoes trapped in a distant chamber. Inside, candlelight flickered to life, revealing polished wood, deep blue upholstery, and opposite her, the still, imposing form of a man who seemed carved from shadow and patience. He did not speak at once. His gaze, cool yet searching, traced her features not with audacity but with study, as though reading weather upon a horizon. "You should not have been forced to stand in the rain," he said at last, voice low, cultivated, edged with steel. The softness of his phrasing startled her more than any command might have done. "London devours what it believes defenseless." Eliza inclined her head, unsure whether courtesy or caution guided her. "Then London and I are better acquainted than I desired," she replied quietly. A faint curve touched his mouth, not quite a smile, yet unmistakably touched by approval. The carriage moved, smooth as a gliding swan. Through narrow windows, blurred streets surrendered to darkness, and with every turning wheel, the life she had known seemed to loosen its hold. "You know who I am," he remarked, not as a question. "Your crest announces you more loudly than any herald," she answered. Silence deepened, threaded with something unspoken, a gravity that drew truth to its surface. "And yet," he murmured, "you do not flinch." She considered this, then met his eyes once more. "I have been flinching for years, Your Grace. Today I am tired." At that admission, something changed. The Duke's posture softened, a subtle yielding of rigid authority. "Then perhaps today is the first that belongs to you again." He reached to the seat beside him and lifted a small velvet case. No adornment marked it, no sign of excess, only possibility. He opened it slowly, revealing a brooch of moonstone and silver filigree, shaped as a raven in mid-flight. "This is not a jewel for display," he said. "It is a token of protection. Wherever it rests, my name stands guard." The weight of such power pressed against her senses, yet he held it as though it were nothing more than a flower. "You owe me nothing," she whispered, though her fingers tingled to receive it. "I owe you less," he countered. "What I give is not payment, but recognition." He placed the brooch into her palm. It pulsed with cool certainty, a stark contrast to the fragile lavender she had carried. "Wear it or cast it away, either choice will be respected." Never before had a man offered her freedom alongside a gift. That alone shook her more than diamonds. She fastened it at her collar, a quiet vow of defiance. Before further words could rise, the carriage slowed once more. He handed her an envelope sealed with black wax. "Do not open it until you are alone," he instructed. "Privacy is a currency rarer than gold." When the door opened, they stood not at some grand estate but before her modest dwelling, its brick darkened by rain. "You will return to the world as if nothing has altered," he added. "But understand that nothing is the same." His gaze lingered, a promise braided into command. By morning, London stirred with new rumor. The tale of the carriage outran every gossiper, leaping drawing-rooms and tea-tables. Some claimed she had bartered herself for influence, others that she was already ruined beyond redemption. Yet gifts arrived nonetheless, lilies white as confession, books bound in dark leather, a seamstress's finest work placed upon her doorstep without name. Fear mingled with envy in every whisper. Men wondered. Women watched. Edmund raged in drawing-rooms, splattering her name across velvet chairs, insisting she had ensnared a demon in human dress. Eliza, however, sat in the quiet of her chamber, the envelope resting upon her desk. When at last she parted the seal, her breath stilled. Inside lay a single sheet, inked dark and precise. "Tonight, beneath the winter ballroom chandeliers, where music silences lies, you will meet the truth that history has hidden from you. Come unseen if you wish. Come unafraid if you can. But come, or remain forever as they have written you. Beneath the script, one solitary initial burned like a brand. R. She lifted the raven brooch, watching moonlight catch upon its wings, and in that glimmer sensed both witness and invitation, knowing this unseen hand had only begun to move her world. She rose and crossed to the narrow window, observing the city's restless silhouette, chimneys coughing smoke, lanterns trembling. Somewhere beyond the fog the Duke existed, and with that knowledge her solitude transformed into a charged anticipation. She thought of Edmund's mocking eyes and felt them fade, replaced by another gaze, steadier, more terrible in its devotion. Her name, once broken in careless mouths, now sounded different in her thoughts, dressed in velvet, touched by power. Outside, faint hoofbeats passed, perhaps nothing, perhaps everything. She gathered the lilies and set them into water, the petals opening like cautious hearts. Across the street, curtains stirred as onlookers retreated, frightened of what favor might mean. Eliza turned back to the mirror, meeting her own reflection, and for the first time in years, she did not see a discarded bride. She saw a woman marked by unseen allegiance, and in the hush of her chamber, beneath the watchful raven, she whispered, "Then let tonight decide who I am to become." The thought settled like a crown upon her brow, heavy yet certain, and as the last light dimmed, anticipation tightened around her heart, counting each second until fate would summon her forward into the unknown. Night folded itself around London like a velvet curtain as Eliza stepped into the winter ballroom, her figure half veiled by shadows, half crowned by candlelight. Crystal chandeliers hung above her like frozen constellations, scattering gold across polished floors where music moved like breath itself. Gentle laughter rippled through the air, yet beneath the elegance wandered an undercurrent of unrest, as if every polished smile concealed a question. She felt it in the slow turn of heads, in the sudden hush that kissed her path. The raven brooch caught the glow of 1,000 candles, igniting murmurs that fluttered like frightened birds. She had not attended such a gathering since her fall, and the memory of judgment clung like frost to her skin, yet she walked forward with a deliberate grace born of quiet rebellion, feeling destiny's unseen fingers guide each measured step. From behind a marble pillar, he emerged, as if carved from the night itself. The Duke of Ravenshollow did not announce his presence with a grand movement, but with stillness, with certainty that parted crowds more effectively than any command. His eyes, dark and fathomless, settled upon her as though they had searched every corner of the world and finally found rest. "You came," he said softly, and in that simple acknowledgment lay an entire kingdom of possibility. "I was summoned by the only voice that dared to whisper truth," she replied, surprised by her own courage. A faint echo of approval crossed his features. He extended his arm with old-world courtesy, and when her hand rested there, the music seemed to bow to their union, lowering its tone to a reverent hush. They walked between dancers who suddenly felt like spectators in a living portrait. No one dared approach. Even those who hungered for scandal found themselves bound by awe. He guided her through arched corridors draped in red velvet and gold until they stood alone in a gallery of ancestral portraits. The painted eyes of dukes and duchesses peered down, stern and unflinching, as though assessing her worth. "These walls have seen centuries of obedience," he murmured. "They have not seen defiance shaped so gently." She allowed her gaze to linger upon a forlorn duchess painted in mourning black. "Then perhaps they are due a kinder vision," she said, her voice neither fragile nor proud, but awakened. Something in him stirred, a fracture in iron resolve. For a long moment, his composure dissolved beneath honesty. "I have watched you for many seasons," he confessed. "Not as a hunter stalks a prize, but as a guardian marks a star he believes the world does not deserve to steal." He stepped closer, and she felt the tremor in his restraint. "You were faithful to a man unworthy of devotion. You endured whispers, humiliation, neglect, yet you did not let bitterness carve lines upon your soul. I recognized grace long before the world chose to recognize cruelty." Her breath faltered. She had never been seen in this manner, never valued without condition. Tears shimmered unsummoned, yet she did not permit them to fall. "I forgot how to believe I was more than ruin," she whispered. "Your gaze reminds me that I was always something else entirely." He raised his hand, hovering near her cheek, unwilling to claim touch without consent. When she leaned into the warmth, the world narrowed to that fragile proximity. "I do not desire your gratitude," he murmured, voice low as prayer. "I desire only that you understand what you have always been to me." He withdrew a folded parchment from his inner coat and placed it gently into her trembling fingers. The crest upon its seal mirrored her brooch, binding them in a language older than rumor. "Open it," he urged, eyes searching rather than commanding. Her heart thundered as she parted the edge carefully, the sound of paper seeming louder than the murmuring orchestra beyond the gallery doors. Inside were lines written not with formality, but with naked truth. He had seen her long before Edmund's betrayal, had admired her resilience from afar, had chosen secrecy over covetousness until the proper moment arrived. The letter confessed not obsession, but reverence, not possession, but devotion. Each sentence was a vow written before fate had dared to seal it. She lowered the parchment, stunned by the magnitude of sentiment that could exist beyond pride. "You risk everything for words that may not be returned," she said faintly. "I risk nothing that has ever meant more to me," he replied, and for the first time his voice trembled, revealing a heart guarded by power yet undone by sincerity. Silence gathered around them, tender and electric. Outside, the music swelled again, unaware of the revolution unfolding within those quiet walls. The portraits above them seemed less severe, the chandeliers less cold. She stepped closer, bound by emotion rather than expectation. "You have given me more than protection," she breathed. "You have given me back myself." The Duke bowed his head a fraction, as if receiving a benediction. "Then let the world believe whatever fable sustains them," he said. "Tonight belongs only to the truth unveiled between us." Beyond the gallery doors, a sudden stir echoed, the sharp sound of a voice raised in protest, the unmistakable timbre of Edmund's fury mingled with shocked exclamations. Eliza felt the old fear attempt to return, yet it faltered beneath a new and unbreakable certainty. He turned toward the sound, expression unreadable, then faced her once more. "The veil has lifted," he murmured quietly, "and there is no returning to shadow." He stepped forward into the hush of the room, and for a moment even the chandeliers seemed to pause their trembling shimmer. Every conversation unraveled into silence, every rustle of silk froze mid-breath. His presence did not need to announce itself. It carried an authority that bent air, shadow, and expectation toward him. She stood at the far end of the hall, hands folded so tightly that her knuckles had paled, her heartbeat a frantic drum beneath the quiet music. The world had asked her to be frail, to bow beneath rumor and accusation. Yet in that instant she discovered a strange, defiant stillness. His eyes met hers, dark and fearless, and something unspoken passed between them, sharper than a vow but gentler than forgiveness. Whispers stirred again in the corners, like cautious creatures testing the dark. They were the same voices that had once carved her name into scandal, that had twisted her dignity into entertainment. Faces she had learned to avoid now turned openly, unsheltered by masks, their curiosity edged with disbelief. She could feel the weight of their attention, as tangible as hands on her skin. Once, such scrutiny would have broken her. Tonight, it steadied her. She raised her chin, not for them, but for herself, and felt the fragile strength of that small gesture bloom inward. He noticed, and the faintest sign of approval curved his expression. He spoke her name, not loudly, not softly, but with a strange, exact clarity that traveled cleanly across the marble floor. It was not the name the world had reshaped, not whispered in accusation, not printed in cruel ink. It was the name her mother had once uttered while brushing her hair, the name tied to gentler memories. Something in her chest loosened at the sound of it. He did not need to explain it. Every heart in the hall heard the truth layered beneath the syllables, a truth sharper than any defense she might have spoken for herself. The man who had once been her husband stood frozen near the dais, his face pale, his mouth caught between denial and terror. She felt a flicker of past pain, but it did not take root. Instead, it passed through her like a forgotten winter wind. The Duke's gaze did not stray toward that figure. It remained steady on her, as though the past had no authority here. Slowly, deliberately, he crossed the distance that separated them, the echo of his steps beating time against the walls, until there was no more space for doubt to settle. "You owe no one an explanation," he said, yet his voice reached beyond her, a declaration that claimed the entire room. "Still, I will give them one." A subtle tension rippled among the guests, anticipation coiling like a spring. He turned slightly, allowing his profile to face the assembled crowd, though his hand closed gently around hers. The contact was warm, grounding, undeniable. Every accusation spoken against this woman has been built on convenience, not truth. Every rumor has fed on silence, not fact. That silence ends now. A tremor of shock crossed several faces. She felt it more than she saw it, a collective shake of perception. The world had always enjoyed tearing down a woman for daring to survive. Now it was being asked to rebuild its understanding. The Duke's fingers tightened in silent reassurance. Within that small pressure, she felt the echo of countless decisions that had led here, choices made in secrecy, loyalty tested in shadows, devotion proved without spectacle. He had offered her sanctuary when she expected exile. Now he offered something more frightening: visibility. "There is no shame in her story," he continued, his voice lowering, rich with intensity. "The shame belongs to those who tried to write it for her." The words fell like stones into a still lake, rippling outward. She felt tears sting her eyes, uninvited yet unashamed. They were not tears of weakness. They were the overflow of relief, fierce and bright. People would still judge. Tongues would still find twists of doubt. Yet the core of her existence had been reclaimed, and nothing could unmake that moment. He turned back to her then, and the world receded. All that remained was the quiet between their shared breaths, the tremor of something unbreakable forming where fear had lived. "If you will have me," he said, so softly only she could hear, "I will stand against every voice that dares rise against you." In that invitation lay a future written not in titles, but in choice. She understood the cost. She also understood the power. She did not answer with words. Instead, she lifted their joined hands, pressing them gently against her heart, letting him feel the truth that pulsed there. Around them, the hall remained frozen, the world suspended between old lies and new reality. And in that silence, just before everything would change forever, the doors at the far end creaked open, ushering in a presence no one had expected, and every eye turned toward a fate that had not yet spoken its name. The chamber was lit only by candelabras trembling under the breath of the storm. Each flicker cast golden wounds upon the silk walls, and shadows crept like living things along the floor, as though the house itself were listening. Rain whispered against the tall windows in delicate, persistent taps, the manner of a desperate suitor who would not depart. Outside, the world dissolved into darkness, but within this private sanctum, fate gathered her final strength. She stood at the heart of the room, still as a figure carved from moonlight, her gloved hands folded with dreadful composure. The pearls at her throat trembled ever so slightly, betraying the turmoil she refused to allow her face. Every breath she drew was a quiet act of defiance against the memories that haunted her, the public smiles, the scornful eyes, the man who once claimed her and then cast her into silence and pity. Behind her, the massive doors groaned shut. He had come without announcement. Even the house seemed startled by him. The Duke's presence carried a gravity that bent the air itself. He did not touch her, not yet, but she felt him as one feels thunder before the strike, a pressure in the soul, a trembling in the bones. His reflection appeared in the dark mirror opposite her, tall, commanding, the firelight catching in his gaze as though it feared him. "You knew this hour would come," he said quietly. "Yes," she replied, her voice calm, though her heart thundered more viciously than the storm beyond the glass. "I only did not know whether it would bring ruin or salvation." His silence was heavier than any accusation she had endured. A fate once signed in candlelight now waited to be spoken aloud. The world beyond their fortune and title had already begun to whisper, had already begun to gossip with sharp, feathered tongues. She knew they called her mysterious, dangerous, enchanted, anything except what she truly was, wounded and alive. He stepped closer. Not in conquest, but in reverence. "You have already been ruined, my lady," he murmured. "By a man too small to honor you. By a society too blind to see you. By a past that had no right to keep your name." Her eyes closed at the truth of it, at the tenderness he so rarely allowed himself to show. "And yet," he continued, standing before her now, only a breath between them, "you stand still. That, I fear, is your greatest power." She looked up at him, and in that instant, she saw more than a duke. She saw the boy who never laughed without restraint, the man forged from loneliness, the heart forced to become iron to survive a world of gold. His title dissolved before her. What remained was a soul that understood her in ways language could never confess. "Then do not make me kneel to that power," she whispered. "I am so terribly tired of bowing." He lifted her chin with a gentleness that shattered her. The storm cried out beyond the walls, the heavens in protest or blessing, neither knew which. For one fragile, stolen moment, there was no empire, no throne of obligation, no audience. Only two hearts imprisoned by station, defying it together. "I would rather kneel to you," he answered softly, "than ever rule over another soul again." The words struck her like sacred flame. This was the moment people wrote histories about without knowing its face. This was the breath between centuries. In this room, beneath flickering candlelight and furious sky, power surrendered not to crown or sword, but to truth. And then the world intruded. A sharp knock shattered the air. Once. Then again. Urgent. Ruthless. Both of them turned toward the door as another voice cut through the chamber, sharp with malice, poisoned by resentment, terribly familiar. "Open it," came the command, dripping with venom, "or I shall have the doors broken and every secret of this house dragged into the light." Her blood turned to ice. It was him. The past had found its way to the present, arrogant enough to believe he still held dominion. In the Duke's gaze, a storm far more dangerous than rain gathered. He did not move toward the door. He moved instead in front of her. A shield. A king. "Stay behind me," he said, not as a request, but as law. "And if he speaks the truth," she murmured. "If he destroys everything." The Duke's eyes darkened with something close to mercy. "Then I shall destroy him first, not with my hands, but with a truth he cannot outrun." The door burst open. Her former husband stood framed in the corridor, the torches exposing the cruel line of his smile, the venomous certainty of a man convinced he had come to collect a debt. "So," he drawled, "England's most powerful duke hides his newest prize in shadow." The Duke did not answer. He simply reached behind himself without looking. And she understood. Placing her hand in his, she stepped forward into the light beside him, spine straight, face lifted, her voice unshaken. "I am not a prize," she said, clear enough to silence even the thunder. "I am his wife." The world seemed to gasp as one living creature. The man froze. "You lie." The Duke raised their joined hands between them, as though presenting a crown. "On the contrary," he replied with calm, lethal elegance. "The only lie here was ever yours." And in that unbearable, magnificent stillness, she felt it. Not fear, not shame, not power, but freedom blooming at last like dawn behind ruined walls. Yet even as the thunder retreated and the room caught its breath, a final truth stirred within her, unvoiced, one that, if revealed, would unsettle even the Duke himself. And then the candles guttered out, leaving only darkness, and her whispered, unfinished confession hanging in the air.